So, thanks, Hugo. And I'm honored to introduce to you today Darrell Rigby, a friend of Agile and a partner at Bain Consulting and author of the book, Doing Agile Right. And Darrell has for many years had the experience of doing exactly that, doing Agile right. And I think if you were writing a history of the Agile movement, say 20 years from now, you'd obviously point to the Agile Manifesto. But for 15 years, the Vatican of Management, Harvard Business Review, systematically ignored Agile. And Agile basically, for them, didn't exist. And 15 years after that, though, Darrell changed that. 2016, he published an article in Harvard Business Review showing that Agile worked for teams. 2 years later, 2018, he published another article in Harvard Business Review showing, hey, Agile works at scale. 2 years later, this year, he published yet another article in Harvard Business Review showing, hey, Agile works for the whole organization, including the C-suite. And he has this book showing in detail exactly how it works. So by this time, of course, the archbishops and the Vatican of Management were getting a bit worried that they might actually have to take account of this huge, growing, and very vibrant global movement. So after all these landmarks that Darrell has made, I asked him this morning, what was his most important accomplishment? His proudest achievement is his family. 3 married children, 8 grandchildren who truly make the world a better place. So without further ado, the champion of Agile in 21st century management, Darrell Rigby.
Steve, you are so kind. Thank you. And let me just say, it is an honor to be part of this conference. I love the concept of an alliance of alliances. You know, I've been a believer for years and years that the conflicts among the various brands of Agile do more harm than good, that we have far more in common than we do in disagreement. And I've learned from all of my work with retailers over 45 years that when customers get confused, they freeze. They decide not to decide. So we actually hurt the cause when we confuse consumers, I think. But one of the greatest steps forward that I've seen, I think, has occurred over this year. And I love what you said in your keynote yesterday, because I do believe we have an extraordinary opportunity these days. I think businesses are now convinced that they're operating in an environment of constant crises and black swan events. When this passes, there are so many other things going on. Digital disruptions, financial shocks, social unrest, military conflicts, one thing after another. And in the past 6 months, I've talked to senior executives at more than 100 companies, and they all say a very similar thing. You know, we didn't know we were doing Agile, but when we read the book, we realize all of these crises are forcing us to be more agile. And we feel good about that. We're making decisions faster. We're removing layers of bureaucracy. We're putting the common good forward. We're realizing that more matters than just financial results. And yet we also know that there are some things that we've got to do better, because it's still sort of haphazard and sporadic. And we know that we're burning out our people. We worry that when we get back to normal ways of doing business, that this will halt, that maybe we'll lose some of the learnings. And so I would guess that everybody on this conference today would share this common ambition. How do we build a business that will thrive in a world of unpredictable and accelerating change? And I just think that's 3 things. It's figuring out, how do you build a system that will replace sporadic innovation with systematic and sustainable innovation, even as crises come and go? How do we gain strength and market share while weaker competitors are culled from the competition? And how do we deliver superior results? And we in the Agile community tend to define results a little more broadly, I think, than much of the world. That we talk about customer results and employee results, and yes, shareholder results, but long-term shareholder results that come as a result of doing a lot of other things good, and communities who are truly grateful that we are in their communities. So how do we do that? Well, there are three things that have to happen. Number one, we have to run the business. Let's call that operations. That's all about making proven successes repeatable and eliminating waste and developing stable and predictable processes. Sometimes we overlook the dignity of the workers who are doing this work, but it's extraordinarily important work. When I go to a hospital for an operation, I want to make sure that all of the best procedures are being followed. I'm one of those people that define major surgery as any surgery that happens to me. It is all major to me. Do it right. And when I get on an airplane, I do not want to hear the pilot say, "Fasten your seatbelts, folks, because we're going to try an agile takeoff." Never done this before. You know, it's all about testing and learning. Haven't checked the fuel, haven't checked the mechanics. We're not going to listen to those bureaucratic air traffic controllers. We'll just go straight to the front of the line, take off like a rocket, and it should be thrilling. Thanks, but no thanks. There are parts of this world, standard operating procedures, and this is where things like Lean Six Sigma have made such an important impact on running the business efficiently. At the same time, we have to change the business effectively. And I know that a lot of people think of innovation as risky. Personally, I think stagnation is far riskier than innovation is. We have to adapt as quickly as our customers, as our markets, as the technologies. And in doing so, we're going to inject variability into the business. Experimentation increases variability. But what we want to do is find the things that are unfavorable and cut those out as quickly as possible, and find the things that are favorable and grow them rapidly. And we have to harmonize those operations. They need each other. They're mutually beneficial. Like yin and yang in Asian philosophy, we need them together and we need to harmonize them. The problem, in my opinion, is that bureaucracy has a tendency as machines. Cultures become boss-centric rather than customer-centric. And we try to manage innovations like predict and command and control assembly lines. It kills innovation. It does not work with innovation. And so I think of Agile not as a goal or a strategy. Agile is a tool for improving results by boosting innovation and restoring organizational balance. I think of Agile very much like Aristotle thinks of the golden mean. It is the balance between having a static and a chaotic organization. And that's what we're trying to do with Agile. Agile is a way of improving innovation. We know that 70 to 90% of innovations fail. And you know why those innovations fail? For one of two reasons. Because they're building the wrong thing, or because they build something that the organization won't adopt. We have lots of data. On the far left here, this is information by Professor Amar Bidet, who looked at the Inc. 500, went back and said, well, you're obviously successful today, but let's compare it to when you got started. How is it? And those entrepreneurs said, 2/3 of them, oh, we had to change our original plan significantly in order to be able to succeed. When you talk to venture capitalists, they tell you the same thing. No, look at the original plan we funded, 2/3 of them have changed. In my own life, I'm very old. I grew up playing not with computer games. I played with Slinkies. Funny though, Slinkies were never invented as a toy. It was designed to stabilize turbulent instruments or sensitive instruments in turbulent seas. But when it fell onto a stack of books and onto a desk and onto a chair and onto the floor, it turned into a toy. Slack started off as a video game company. It went bankrupt as a video game company, but they found this communication tool in the back room being used by engineers. They repurposed the organization and it turned into the fastest growing unicorn of all time. Disney Frozen. I don't know how many of you have watched this animated movie. I'm a grandfather, 8 grandchildren. For a couple of years, I watched this movie every day, at least once a day, and sometimes many times with a granddaughter in particular. But it changed. Originally, Elsa was evil. She was a Cruella de Vil. She was a Maleficent. And in the middle of the movie, a husband and wife songwriting team said, we think that's wrong. We think she's misunderstood. They played a song called Let It Go. It changed the movie. Anna and Elsa became beloved sisters. Elsa became beautiful. She became independent. Many of you are probably accustomed to using YouTube. What you may not realize is that YouTube began, yes, as an online video dating site. And after 1 week of nobody putting up online videos for dating, they opened it up and said, put anything you want, cats, dogs, kids, anything you want. And that's when it became a huge success. So my message, if you remember nothing else from this discussion today, please remember this. Plan to adapt or plan to fail. Because your innovations will fail if they're not adaptive. And that's what Agile is all about at the team level anyway. We're moving from a traditional approach of perfect predictions and failure avoidance and infrequent big bang releases to a more agile approach of rapid learning, prototypes, customer collaboration, frequent releases, and faster time to value. That's how it works at the team level, and it works well. In fact, all sorts of data shows that agile innovation teams outperform regular innovation teams by 60 to 100%, and happier, more productive team members in the process. That's wonderful. But here's the problem. In the last 3 months, I've been working with 3 of the companies that you would probably consider the most innovative companies in the world. All of them have more than 2,000 Agile teams up and running. But what they tell me is, Darrell, at this point, launching Agile teams is easy. We've done it hundreds, thousands of times. But what we're finding is that Agile teams don't create Agile enterprises. And that's what we'd like to work on. How do we build Agile enterprises? Well, that's a different game. And we see companies typically going through. We start by building Agile teams, figuring out how to make them beacons of inspiration for the rest of the organization. We evolve to be doing Agile at scale, and Agile at scale means 2 things. We're likely to do Agile in a lot more parts of the organization, and we're likely to do bigger programs that require dozens or hundreds of Agile teams working together in order to accomplish the mission. And eventually we'll move to becoming an Agile enterprise where we're doing those 3 things we talked about earlier. Running the business efficiently, changing the business effectively, and harmonizing those operations. But here's the thing. I am in the process of undoing a lot of bad Agile implementations. There are 2 ways that you can go at it, basically. One is the structure-based approach that I see far too often. So let's just start with a radical restructuring of the entire company. Often, by the way, we're getting rid of 30% of the people. Now, that should force changes in the ways people work. And theoretically, that should change results. Unfortunately, it mostly creates chaos, and tangible business results never seem to materialize. What I tend to recommend is a results-based approach. That is, Let's find the initiatives that could have a huge impact on the performance of the company, change the ways that people work on those kinds of programs, determine all the levers that could impact that work, make it better, and test them in real dynamic environments, and then scale and balance each element of the operating model to improve results. And that leads to a process that looks something like this. We're testing and learning. We're using agile approaches to build an agile system to achieve the kinds of results that we want. And we're going to touch on all things eventually, including strategy and leadership and culture, the planning and budgeting and reviewing processes, eventually structures and accountabilities, talent, business processes. We're likely to touch on all of these. By the way, a little pet peeve of mine, often there are a lot of nominations for the dumbest idea in business. But here's my nomination. My nomination for the dumbest idea in business is annual cycles. We're in the middle of one of those annual cycles right now, the annual planning and the budgeting process. Why? What in the world is so magical about an annual cycle? Well, you know the answer to that. There's only one thing magical about an annual cycle. That is, it's how long it takes the Earth to orbit the sun. Now, what a dumb way to run the business. Imagine a customer coming to you and saying, I've got a real problem with the product and the service you're providing me. And you say, I hear you. You know, that's really sad. But unfortunately, our budget is fixed to the orbit of the sun, and we're only a third of the way around. So come back in 8 months and we'll see what we can do for you. We have to move to more frequent, more adaptive cycles. But if you asked me where would I start, I would not start by changing the organizational structure. In fact, when you survey tens of thousands of teams and say, what's getting in your way of adopting and scaling Agile, you don't see organizational structure on here. What you do see is a lot of things like resistance to change and not enough leadership participation and the organizational culture at odds with our values. I think you heard some of this yesterday of teams that are saying, yeah, we can run like great software teams all day long, but we're encountering friction. We're running into walls when we get to the organizational level. And that's where I would start, because I think very few roles need to change more than the roles of leaders. And leaders get better when they start to understand David Ricardo's focus on comparative advantages as opposed to Adam Smith's emphasis on competitive advantages. And here's what I mean by that. A lot of executives feel that because they have competitive advantage, that is, they're better at a whole bunch of things than the rest of the organization is, that therefore they have to meddle in it. And that's just wrong, because often their advantages are disputable, but at the very least, they're probably not adding much to those teams. Worse yet, every hour they spend micromanaging is an hour less of leading. That's comparative advantage. I'm going to focus on those things where if I don't do them, the opportunity cost is enormous. So I learned to delegate to other people. I learned that when they're happier, they're more innovative. And when they're more innovative, they're happier. And it builds an enormous capability, a future generation of skilled managers who learn how to work in cross-functional teams. And they can focus their time on leading, on building the Agile operating system, removing all the impediments, focusing people on the vision, making sure that they understand why we're doing what we're trying to do. So this doesn't just feel like one more transformation program led by one more transformation office. No, this is a new way of working. We're going to do this forever. The senior executives are going to lead by example. Not what we say, what we do day in and day out. And this requires individual personal behavior change. So think about it. Why do we behave the way that we behave? Why do we have the work styles that we have? It's not that senior executives are dumb. What we have found over time is we start with a base level of assumptions that we often learn in business school or training programs, and often it's subtle, it's unspoken, but our habits are developed by assumptions that when certain trigger events happen, we behave in a way, we get results, we get rewards, and that reinforces our assumptions. And in Frederick Taylor's scientific management, those assumptions are the rest of the people aren't nearly as good as senior executives. We don't have much growth available, so let's just focus on costs. And therefore, when we get into planning sessions, all we do is cut costs, and we avoid risk, and we force conformance to plans at all costs. And we reward people for what? For conforming to plans, even though those plans are obsolete. What we're trying to do in an Agile transition is to move to Agile ways of working and say, let's change some of those assumptions. Let's question some of those assumptions. Maybe there's more growth possible than we realized. Maybe workers are capable of doing a whole lot more than we realized. Maybe our job is to multiply the results of them. So when we get into planning sessions, we try different behaviors, experimentation and autonomy. We get better results. We offer different rewards. And only when we replace enough of those prior assumptions and behaviors with better assumptions and behaviors will we get senior executives behaving the way that we should be behaving. It's not just a matter of arguing or debating. It's creating real life experiences that change our habits. And that requires a different way of working in whatever organizational structure you may have. And personally, structure. Because no matter what the division of labor, when it gets to this innovation cycle, I'm going to take an end-to-end customer journey, and I'm going to find hot points that are disturbing customers, and I'm going to pull people from all kinds of multifunctional positions to solve those problems. And then when we solve the problems, we're going to look at the organizational structure and say, to systematize this, I'll bet we're going to have to change it a little bit. So let's do that. I don't get hung up on the organizational structure. It will improve over time. The key is, how do I develop end-to-end, customer-back, integrated, cross-functional solutions that I can then make happen in the organization? And when I look at the organizational structures of large-scale companies, and all of these red dots are Agile teams, persistent Agile teams. These gray dots are temporary Agile teams. These red people are in traditional functions, but their jobs are, I want you in HR or I want you in legal to work with these Agile teams and make sure they don't have to wait for more than a day to remove the impediments to their behaviors. Preferably, solve it within an hour. You are help desks, and I want you to work with these Agile teams. And notice that the Agile leadership team itself is an Agile team. When we do that, we get what my friend Steve has been talking about for so long. We need both Agile principles or values or mindsets or whatever you want to call it, and Agile methods to help those teams work effectively. But throughout the organization, we need everybody in the organization adopting these principles. Obsession with customer, that not just the right, but the responsibility to contribute innovative ideas, respect for diverse opinions. People with diverse opinions are our greatest friends, not our enemies. That's how we learn. And yes, we'll use all of these things we've learned about Agile practices in Agile teams, but I don't need accounts payable to be running daily stand-ups or frequent releases. These are more practices for Agile teams. And when we do that, notice what impact it has on the most senior leaders' time. I've been doing studies of senior leaders' calendars, and I've found something pretty interesting. 60 to 80% of senior leaders' time is spent in operations management. Now think about that. 60 to 80% of their time doing operational reviews, financial reviews, administrative work, corporate governance, 60 to 80% of their time. Only 10% of their time on strategy development and growth and talent and culture management, another 30% of their time. Now, look what happens 3 years later when these executives have changed their personal behaviors and started trying to develop an agile enterprise. Now just take a look at this, because the amount of time that has gone to strategy development and growth has quadrupled. 40% of their time, even more time going to talent and culture management. And they're still forced to do some operations management, but even that time has changed, because when they're in operating reviews, as opposed to just critiquing them, they're providing strategic context for, let me remind you of what your mission is and why you're doing this. How can we help you to accelerate decision making? How can we improve cross-unit coordination? How can we develop hypotheses? How can we help you to do experimental design? How can we remove impediments from you so that you are more likely to succeed? And when that happens, we see something remarkable in the entire organization. Because the companies that are the best managers of time, talent, and energy, they're no busier. They're not working more hours in a day, but they do have 40% greater productivity. And how do they get that? They get that by reducing organizational drag, bureaucratic processes. They're able to attract, retain, and unleash much greater talent. And as a result, by Thursday morning at 10 a.m., they have accomplished the work of what they used to do by the end of day Friday. And over a 10-year period of time, they'll generate 30 times more output. That's my objective. What I've learned about Agile over the past 15 years is that it can do this. It can make us as senior executives happier, more successful, more productive, and it can make everyone in the organization understand the dignity of work, that they have an important role, and that they too can be a part of an Agile enterprise. Thank you.